Hello, and welcome to AI Curious. My name is Jeff Wilser. I'm a journalist, I'm a human, and I'm curious about AI. So there are many reasons to have concerns about AI. The concerns that get the most attention in headlines are the doomsday fears like killer robots and all-powerful AI systems that turn humans into paperclips. And yes, those make for fun sci-fi films, but there are far more sober, concrete problems that exist in the short to medium term. And that gets us to the very complex subject of AI and race. Our two guests today have thought deeply on this topic, and they're at the tip of the spear of AI and race research. This would be Dr. Broderick Turner, Assistant Professor of Marketing at Virginia Tech, and Angela E., a doctoral candidate in marketing also at Virginia Tech. They co-authored a recent paper that explored just how exactly race is handled in AI models. The paper is called Representations and Consequences of Race in AI Systems, and you can find a link to it in the show notes. So in this conversation, we get into their key takeaways from the research, but we also explore the larger intersection of AI and race. When should race be included in models? When should it be ignored? And how to handle it in a way that's fair and respectful. I know there are listeners of this podcast who are working on the front lines of AI development, and I think it's important for them to hear this. And honestly, anyone who is excited about the upside of AI, and that includes me, should also grapple with these more complicated, tricky, nuanced questions of race and AI. And happily, towards the end of the episode, Broderick and Angela do give some very concrete ideas of how AI can and should handle race. And I really love what he shares as a North Star almost, that all human lives should be treated equally. He starts with that as a bedrock principle and then gives a framework. But before we get into the AI-ness of it all, we'll start with an overview of a community that Broderick co-founded called the TRAP Lab, TRAP, or Technology, Race, and Prejudice Lab, that I think gives some good overall larger context. And on a very quick technical note, if you'll indulge me, there are a few moments when one of our guests' microphones has a bit of scratchiness, so we're not going to win a gold medal here for sound engineering, but what they are saying is important. So I wanted to leave it in, audio, warts, and all. With that, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Broderick Turner and Angela E., co-authors of the paper, Representations and Consequences of Race in AI Systems. Dr. Turner and Angela, welcome to the pod.
What up? I'm excited.
So let's start, Broderick, with one of, as I understand it, one of your mottos is tech won't save us, we save us. Can you elaborate on what that means and how it applies to AI?
Yeah, the secret about AI, right, is that it's just human beings, right? There are human beings in the data, there are human beings in the classification, there's human beings in the development, and then there are human beings that are the users. And so we have this idea in our head that technology is this magic box that's going to solve all of our problems, when really it's just us, right? So the only way for technology to save us is if we save us. So looking for some magic tech that's going to solve climate change or racism or sexism is really silly when it's just human beings and we should be the ones doing the work to save ourselves.
I love that overall ethos to think about as we explore this conversation. And then let's get into the TRAP Lab. Tell us about the TRAP Lab, what it stands for, why you started it, and what the goals are.
Yeah, so we started the TRAP Lab to solve a problem.
And for listeners, it stands for
the Technology, Race, and Prejudice Lab. So we started the Technology, Race, and Prejudice Lab going on 4 years now. And it started something really small. I got a review back on a paper that was dealing with race and technology. And I could not tell if the reviews were because I was trash or because the reviewers had some preconceived racism right? And so I called up some friends and I was like, hey, can you read these reviews of me and tell me where I was garbage and we can improve this research, or where the reviewers are just being weird? And they sat down with me for an hour, went through the stuff, and I was like, this is super helpful. I'm going to be back here on Zoom same time next week. And if anybody else wants to share anything, I will be here at 1 p.m. on Wednesday in the seat on Zoom. Come join us, or come join me. And that has now been every week during the semester for the last 4 years now. And we've grown from being just a handful of researchers that were interested in these questions to now think of a mailing list of 170 research active faculty and doctoral students, as well as professionals across the US. We average somewhere about 25 to 30 people per one of these Zoom calls, where we have researchers like Angela that come in and share the work that they're doing in a place where we already have the shorthand. So you don't have to spend 30 minutes explaining, hey, racism's real. Instead, you can get right down to the work and really start to improve it. And the beauty of this is that we've built a safe space for people to answer these hard questions. And we start to build a collective of, again, scholars and professionals that are working on these types of things. I tried to keep count. I think at last count, there might be something like 15 or 16 working papers that are currently at some stage in the Trap Lab. I wish my name were on all of them. They're not. But it's because people can come in and be like, yo, I need someone that knows computer science. And we have a computer scientist that I know this well. Or I need a quant scholar that can do agent-based modeling. I don't know how to do that, but someone in the lab does. Or I need someone that understands Asian American consumers. Or like with Angela's job market work, I need someone that understands the way people make healthcare decisions. And so what this has allowed then is just, again, building a bubble and then protecting that bubble at all costs to go, if you're inside the bubble, we're going to do everything we can to support you, everything we can to make sure that you can be involved in academia in a place that might not necessarily like the work that you're doing, especially post-affirmative action. And so I think it's starting to work.
Amazing. And for listeners, we'll have a link to the Trap Lab in the show notes. You can check it out there. All right, let's jump into your research at the intersection of AI and race. Angela, let's start with you. Can you talk about what questions you were hoping to answer, and talk about sort of a high level the research you guys published, and then we'll get into more details.
Yeah, sure. In this research, we wanted to see what race exactly is and how race is represented in typically AI systems, and some of the consequences of these representations. And at the very end, we make a few recommendations on how future developers and researchers in AI should incorporate race in these systems. It was first motivated when we observe a lot of big tech making some mishaps in regards to how they use race in their generative tools. For example, in this past February, Google released Gemini. And when the users were using Gemini and searching for things like US founding fathers, sometimes it will output like Black individuals. This was criticized over social media, and it illustrates how these researchers in AI have trouble dealing with race accurately and sensitively. So we wanted to really address that in our paper.
When you say, just to baseline things, when you say, correct me if I'm getting this wrong, what race is, can you elaborate a little more on what that means? Because I think that just a layperson perhaps listening with him, I know what race is. So-and-so is Black or white or this color or that color or ethnicity. Can you elaborate a little more on kind of the nuance to that question?
Yeah, so typically when we ask a layperson, they think race is more of a biological concept, but actually race is a social cultural construct that was stemmed from the European colonization period. Race was created to explain or justify the slavery that was happening. So these groups of racial categorization we see today really stems from this European colonization period. And it's Basically, race is a product of racism, so it's used to justify unequal allocation of resources and opportunities along these racial groups.
Thank you. And getting back to the research questions at hand, talk a little more about how this applies to AI and what some of your takeaways were for AI developers and AI research teams.
Yeah, I first just looked at past research as well as popular press articles in how race is represented in AI systems as an input and as an output. And generally, what we find is AI is represented as fixed categories. For example, Black, White, Asian, Native American, Pacific Islander, and etc. And oftentimes, when race is incorporated in these algorithms and AI, there's no explanation as to why they use a certain category, why they do not use certain categories, or where they source their concepts of race from. For example, in training data for facial analysis systems, they will use certain categories, for example, South Asian, East Asian, Black, and white. But they will exclude certain categories, or they do not include mixed race, and they don't really provide an explanation why they did that in some of these AI systems and structures. There's several consequences of this. First is racial misclassification, because there's so many more differences between individuals within a racial group. And it can also lead to essentializing race, us thinking that race cannot be changed, is something biological, and attributing the differences to race instead of these underlying factors that might be contributing to the differences. For example, in medical algorithms, when I'm predicting kidney function, I might say that there's a difference in kidney function between Black and white, while the underlying factors might be differences in biomarkers or other proteins.
Broderick, can you elaborate a little more on this, on the consequences of when we don't have the appropriate understanding, or if categories is the right word, of race, what the, maybe Angela just gave a great example, medical consequence. What are some other cultural consequences of this problem?
Yeah, let's give a couple of examples. We can talk about some of the algorithm audit work that we've been doing in the Trap Lab, for instance. If I ask you to describe yourself in 5 words, Jeff, what 5 words might you use?
That's a deeper question than I was expecting. I love it. I'm going to keep it toward the lens of what we're doing here. It's a curious, clearly slow second word.
Okay, curious, slow. Got 3 more.
Okay, I guess I'm describing personality. Do I need to describe like my identity? Would I say like, oh, male, a certain age? Okay, so I think I see where you're going, and I'm being thick-headed here. So, like identity-wise, sure, my age. Okay. So 47 years old.
You look great for your age, by the way.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate that. Male. I guess if it's more. I guess I always think the exercise is more like, oh, how would you describe yourself as a person? Thinking about your psychology.
No, I just want 5 words. You gave me curious, slow, male.
There we go.
47.
Is that 4? Word. Okay. To play along here, white would probably be a word as far as if you're going to describe this person, right?
Perfect. Yeah. Is that really the word the first 5 words you describe yourself as white?
No, probably not. Probably not.
Okay. So there's a point I'm making here. Okay. When we ask people, and we've run this experiment, this is a rehash of stuff done in the 70s. We ask people to describe themselves in 5 words. Less than 3% of white people use the word white to describe themselves in the first 5 words.
And I'm sure I would, to your point, I am sure I would not have without the context of this go.
I know. I saw you struggling a little bit. It's not your fault.
Like, what are you looking for here?
I wasn't looking for anything. I wanted the answer, right? As racial minorities, people racialized as Asian or Black or Hispanic, will tend to use one of those descriptors in the first 5 words they use to describe themselves. Okay, this is just an example, like an experimental example. Now, what does that mean for the internet and for AI? The word white is less associated with racial categorizations than, say, the word Black. If we then build generative AI systems on top of this data and this classification, we're going to get some weirdness, right? As an example, there was a time, I don't think they've ever really fixed it, where if you asked DALI 2 for images of black men, it would give you pictures of people that look like me in a suit. And you asked for images of white men, it would give you actual little blobs of white, like the color white colored men, because white people don't describe themselves in racial terms, and the system doesn't understand white as a racialized term. That's one consequence. You can then think about, okay, whose language is included or not included, right? As an example, there are some products that have come out that try to identify hate speech, right? Is this hateful words, or should we block these words on social media? If I've only had, call it, older white women make that classification for what is and what is not hate speech, then here's a coaching example. Both versions of the N-word, the one that ends in A and the one that ends in ER, will be treated the same inside these systems. So if I say, what up, my N-word that ends in an A to my N-words that end in A's, the system will go, this is bad language, right? When like the one that ends in ER is bad. That does mean something really horrible. Whereas if it ends in A and I'm saying it to my friends, it's innocuous. It's, hey, buddy. And so we should, something that we're starting to teach now, we came up with this responsible AI in the marketplace class at Virginia Tech. And we're teaching students right now to think through who are the humans in each part of this triangle that create these AI systems. Who are the humans that are in the data? Who are the humans that are in the classification? Who are the humans that are doing the development? And who are the users? And where are those humans different? If your users are young black men in Chicago, but the developers are rich white guys in San Francisco, there's a very good chance that they might understand the world a little bit differently and would lead to some weird downstream consequences. And the more we can investigate those pieces, the better. And when it comes to race, we should really think about, why do we even have a racial classification in the system? Or is this something that even matters to the downstream outcome?
Yeah, I was going to go there. I think an obvious question might be, okay, what would happen if we don't include race in any capacity in these models, right? There's no categories. Okay, if there's a model about medical stuff and medicine and people and outcomes, we just pipe in actual data of all, just not have categories. Just our inputs are all medical issues, outputs are all medical outcomes. We erase. Or like, what if there's no? I guess is the concern that if we don't at all model in race, that could perpetuate some really negative stereotypes that exist. And so the idea of putting in race to help counter that, for example, because historically, and I might stumble and fumble through this, so apologies, but for example, if historically there are not enough people of color represented as doctors, right? Or not as many women doctors, medical doctors as male. And so you ask AI, hey, show me an image of a medical doctor. Historically, it might show just a white man, right? And so because the data set it's pulling from tends to show, because historically there were more white men than women or people of color, medical doctors, it would just show white men. And we want to be more inclusive. We said, no, that's effed up. We want to show that a medical doctor can be female, male, any race. And so there's an effort to make sure there's adequate and accurate and appropriate racial representation amongst medical doctors. So that's why race is there. And I'm getting a drift here, but is that one reason that race is brought in to try and be more inclusive, but it has these kind of unintended negative consequences? Or are there other reasons? Or what would you guys want to see? What do you think is like the best way forward here?
I think the first question before adding race into any equation is asking if there's a benefit of adding race first. So if there's no real benefit of adding race, don't add it. Because typically what people do is race is they treat it as a background demographic variable. Past people have been using it, so I'll just include it in my model as well.
Hmm.
Yeah. And maybe a second point is also, instead of representing race as these fixed categories that can't be changed, AI is based a lot on probabilities. Use and capitalize on that inherent nature of race and represent these individuals as probabilities instead of belonging to a single category might be some of the ways to go forward.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And Broderick, what are your thoughts on that?
First, Angela's nailing this. This is exactly the way we should think about this. If you should ask yourself, how does race matter if I use race in this model? If we're going to use the medical example, sometimes race is used as a proxy that will just lead to worse racialized outcomes. As a specific example, the NFL basically has different protocols for certain injuries that they use a racial qualifier, right? So, like, the standard for Black NFL players is different than the standard for white NFL players, even though they have the same job. And what that means, the consequences of that is they pay out less money in like healthcare and health insurance to Black players than they do white players, right? Under the auspices that this is just the algorithm that's telling us to do this, when really it's uses a way to pay Black players less. We can also think about some of the work on like cancer detection, where again, race is used as a blunt proxy that does not necessarily relate to the underlying disease state, right? So again, race is a product of racism, right? It is race did not come first. Race came after we created a system of extraction, right? And so we have to ask ourselves as we're building these systems, does this lead to greater extraction and worse racialized outcomes? And in my view, and this is something that I work on with the Trap Lab, if you do nothing in any tech system, because racism exists and is systemic, the default outcome always leads to greater racial harm.
You far more clearly articulated what I was trying to say before in a very awkward way, that given the racism that exists, it for people put in some kind of almost like a racial offset to counteract the structural racism that exists.
Yes,
right.
Because otherwise the output will always be racist.
Yes.
That's it. There's no, that's how the systems are built. And so
garbage in, garbage out, racism in, racism out.
And in some ways worse, all right? Because most computer systems have to discretize like the variable space, right? So they have to take infinity and merge it down to some binary outcome somewhere. Yes or no, approve, disapprove. And so in some ways you can like exasperate these racial differences because you've tried to make infinity, this huge space, into something very tight and binary. So yeah, we got to ask ourselves, what is the outcome? And then let's fix the outcome. All right. I'll give you a specific example. This company, Axon, just came out with a product that writes police reports. So it takes in existing body cam footage and then with the officer involved, like writes police reports, right? The original version of this thing, before they released it and tested it, the outputs were uneven in the language used when it was a Black suspect versus a white suspect, right? So when it's a Black suspect, the words associated were essentially more aggressive. So instead of the person left the scene, it would say the Black person fled the scene. Instead of rolling out this product with these biased differences in racial usage, they instead said, here's the standard we're going to test against, and let's not roll this thing out till we can put in the word Black or white, and we get equalized outcomes in the type of language that is used.
Okay.
In every company, if you're going to roll out a product that deals in any of this generative AI space, that where the people that are on the end of the product look like America, are on this probability of Americans, then you really need to test it before it rolls out.
Yes.
And
so that was a win, right? That was a case study of the company in your mind did it the right way.
100%. Right. Yep. And so we should really start to think about, how do we make these things equal, right? My view is that like we should treat all life equally. All human life should be treated equally. We should not roll out any products that treat humans differently because of their racial identity. All right. This includes facial recognition products, right? So, if the great secret about facial recognition is that it's really bad in terms of false matches for Black women compared to other people. Right. And we're not talking 5% worse. We're talking on 5x to 500x worse in terms of false matches. Right. So this means if we rolled out some surveillance system that was like, we're going to catch criminals by matching their faces to a database, we're going to harm Black women. It's the 5 times worse or 500 times worse than we would any other people. That's crazy. And so should we roll out systems that aren't treating all lives equally? My view is no. That seems like a horrible idea.
Thank you. That was so clearly said. One thing the circle I'm trying to square is that concept of, in the great example you gave, this company realized, okay, when we left it alone, it tended to have language that negative connotations and more aggressive language to Black men. Black man fled the scene, right? So if they left it alone, bad racial outcomes. And you yourself, Broderick, earlier said that, geez, often left alone, these things like racism in, racism out. Angela, you also said earlier that unless there's a good reason, we probably shouldn't put race in these models, shouldn't add to it if we don't have to. How do you guys think about that circle of the implication? Well, actually, in an ideal world, we don't put race in here. But we don't live in an ideal world. We don't live anywhere close to an ideal world. So we actually do have to. And then the game is, given that we have to, what's the best way to do it and the most appropriate and non-ham-fisted, non-too broad of a way, and to be more nuanced about it. Am I getting that right? Basically,
yeah, I think the easiest way to think about this is you start from a very simple standard that everyone can agree with. My standard is that all life is equal. All right. All human lives should be treated.
That's a
equally.
Great starting point.
So
it's very rock solid ground.
This is just where I'm going to start from. All right. So this is always my starting point. This is my null hypothesis space. This is the ground that I want to walk on, that all lives will be treated equally. Okay. Now, if we start from there, then we know from any output from an AI system whether or not all lives are treated equally. All right. We can do these things called algorithm audits where you basically send in fake stimuli and then measure the outcome. So we can create profiles that are like, this is a Black person, this is a white person, and we can see what is the outcome. If the outcome is equalized because we add race in, great, right? We've equalized the outcome. If the outcome gets equalized because we take race out, great. We've equalized the outcome. But that is always my standard, right? Are we going to treat all lives equally? And if we're doing that, we can make decisions about what levers to move inside of these systems, right? I think the beauty of how Angela has been thinking about this is that a lot of the stuff is really context dependent, but almost no one, right? None of these companies really, very few, are asking this question of what can we do in terms of race, gender, sexual orientation, so that we've equalized the outcome for all lives.
Thank you. And this is maybe a strange question, but I'd love to go back to where we were a little while ago, given all this much richer context. Angela, now that I have and your listeners have a much better, richer perspective on kind of some of the problems and challenges with how AI is incorporating race, and then also how the two of you think that AI should be handling race. Let's go back now to your study and share a little more again about what were your main takeaways? What were the main ways you saw that AI was handling race? And then what are the key takeaways, like for listeners of his podcast who might be working at AI development company or startup, what do you want them to take away from this? What are the kind of key takeaways from your research that you hope that the folks who are designing and training and building AI really take to heart? And Angela, let's go start with you back again. Given this larger framework, what was the main insight from the study?
So generally my observation was that, again, race is presented as this fixed racial categories that are remnants of basically what was created during the European colonization. Mm-hmm. And it's just used as an obvious concept, that's something that doesn't need to be explained and something that's just automatically added into any equations or in AI systems or models. But I really want researchers in AI as well as developers of AI to think about what are the implications of using race as an input or an output in these systems.
So in other words, if I can take a stab at synthesizing this, what you found was, in the way that Broderick described it a moment ago, was to make sure all human beings are treated equally, which is the North Star here, some outcome that's not treating people equally, then you figure out an appropriate way to recalibrate for race, or imagine for gender or other variables too. What you're seeing is that people going into it almost because how it was done by the last guy or the last team, they said, okay, cool. This is what we do. We have these 6 categories. We're just going to pump in these 6 categories regardless of what the model is doing. We just assume it's appropriate. It's going to pump in these 6 categories. And that has, in a very kind of simplistic way, and that has unintended consequences potentially of when you put those categories in, that kind of adds an element, an awkward, at best, generously awkward at worst, additionally exacerbating racism, to having race handled in that fashion. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. And then let's, Broderick, what kind of and you've already given a bunch of really great takeaways here. Anything else you'd like? What else would you want to see teams that are developing AI? What else do you think is important for them to walk away from this research, from Angela's research specifically, and then from your larger work on this subject more generally? What do you want AI teams to walk away with?
Again, I think the most important thing we can walk away with is a commitment to a standard that all lives should be treated equally. Like we start there, and then we can start to ask more specific questions about the products that we're integrating into our technology stack or our suite, right? Mm-hmm. So again, let's go back to facial recognition. If you're a company that's going to add facial recognition to your products, and we're talking about facial matching, right? Like you want to take a face and then match it to some database. If you buy an off-the-shelf system, you take an off-the-shelf facial recognition system, there are researchers that test this every 3 months to see, does this perform better for different types of faces, right? Mm-hmm, There's a bunch of data on this, and the data would all show that as it stands, there's the average difference between a white male face and a black female face is close to 500x worse in terms of false recognition. So 1 in a million white male faces are miscategorized, and 1 in 1,000 black female faces are miscategorized. But if we think about billions of instances of these systems running, that's a huge problem. And so if you can't make it so that your technology treats all lives equally, you probably should go to a different product. Right. At least what I found. So I've done some consulting work and some of the stuff I'm talking about with developers, right, and computer engineers. The worst thing you can do if you're trying to change an engineer's mind, right, is to tell them what they can't do. If I go to an engineer and I say, "There's no way you can do this," they will stop listening to me, right, and instead, in their brain, start to build out every way that they could solve this problem. So if I'm like, "Hey, this doesn't work," right? This current technology is trash. They'll go, "No, it can't be," and they'll stop listening. Instead, if you lay out the data and you're like, "Hey, our standard is that all lives are treated equally. Let's agree to that, and let's solve to that problem." Your engineers will then go, I can solve that problem. Right? He didn't tell me it didn't work. He didn't just say technology bad.
It's more a growth mindset right there, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So this is what I want developers and managers to really think about, is that they have a ton of power. The products that these people put out, especially these larger companies, will instantly affect millions, if not billions of lives. The decisions that you make, if you're a developer listening to this, the decisions that you make can impact a billion people, right? And it can be positive or negative. And so you should decide if you agree with me that all lives should be treated equally. Now, if you think differently, if you think some people should be treated worse, I don't know how to help you there, right?
Yeah.
But if you've committed to this, all lives should be treated the same, then I think you will investigate a little bit harder about what tools you're using and what you're adding into these products.
On that note, Broderick, given the billions of people that could and likely will be impacted by these kind of foundational like architecture choices being made now in various ways. You mentioned facial recognition, software. What else more generally, what other concerns do you both have about AI development with respect to race and where this could be headed?
You want to take it, Angela? I have some ideas.
Yeah, I have thoughts. Go for it, Angela.
A general concern is that making any of these AI-related products is a race. So, for example, for ChatGPT, being first has big advantages for that certain company. And I don't think they get to fully think out the implications of what their products can lead to and the consequences. Before rolling out a product, thinking about the potential harm that it could create and how to mitigate that from happening before they roll it out. I think that's a big concern because generally these products tend to be developing at such a fast pace.
Broderick?
If companies commit to making sure their products treat all lives equally, they will make a ton more money. All right. This is the market logic, at least, right? If I roll out a product that only serves people of a certain melanin content that live in North America, right? Like, I can't have a global reach with my product. I'll give you a really specific example. People listening to this podcast now, have you ever gone to the bathroom, put your hands under one of those automatic sinks, and the water not come out immediately? I guarantee you that the people with more melanin listen to this podcast right now, your African Americans, your Nigerians, your South Asian people are going, dang, this is happening to me. When I put my hands under the thing, I have to move my hands back and forth a bunch until the water starts to come out. Now, why did that happen? That happens because they did not include any darker hued people in the original test sets for this very innocuous product. And they've had trouble. Any of these manufacturers, Kohler, et cetera, that do these automatic faucets have had trouble rolling this out in other countries other than America because they don't work. They're losing market share because they didn't treat all lives equally, right? They're leaving money on the table. And so if you are a manager right now listening to this, you got to ask yourself, am I shooting myself in the foot and not making all the money? The logic makes a lot of sense to me, right? We can look at the Axon product I mentioned earlier, right? The draft one that's using AI to write these police reports. Had they released that product that had trash outcomes for white people and black people, it wouldn't be the fastest selling product in Axon's history, which it currently is, right? All lives equally, double your share price. It seems super, super simple to me that you can do well and do good. And it's not even just doing good. It's just saying, dang, if we treated all the lives the same, we could sell to all the people.
If we're actually not horrible people, we might also make more money too. That's great.
You can make this. Markets are huge, right? It's just, it's exasperating to me sometimes because it's so simple. Like, treat lives the same. And then you can sell to more lives. That's
So love it. Last couple questions here as we wind this down. That's a great note to wind down on. What are your thoughts in general? Quick question for you each. What's your overall temperature, if you will, in AI? Positive, negative? Are you excited or is more concerned or excited? And then if you can give me a quick sense of how, if you use AI in your own personal lives, whether for funsies or for work. Angela, you go first.
My general stance towards AI is I'm a bit cautious because it's powerful. So it hugely benefits our lives by making and automating tasks. But at the same time, it could have that same downward potential for these type of AI tools. So always being cautious when I'm using anything related to AI, because I don't know how that information is being fed into the AI and how they're going to be using it all behind the scenes. So on a general basis, for example, yesterday I was making an experiment and I needed help with JavaScript coding to make it look more chatbox-like. So I use ChatGPT in that regard, but I don't use this specific tool for conducting research or asking anything related to research because I'm not exactly sure how they will use that information.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah,
Broderick.
yeah.
So let's talk about generative AI in particular. Generative AI has no relationship to accuracy. Zero. All right. It literally just makes word-shaped objects, and then we interpret what those word-shaped objects mean. So if it has no relationship to accuracy, I will not use it for anything in my life that requires accuracy. All right. And my research will not use it because I require accuracy. If I am trying to solve a problem, I won't use it because I require accuracy. For stuff that doesn't require accuracy, yeah, who cares? If I want to take a story and write it in a voice of Freddy Krueger in a haiku sonnet, cool.
Right.
That require no accuracy. It's when I don't know. My great hot take on generative AI is that it's a very cool tool that has been wildly overhyped about what types of problems it can solve. If it has no relationship to accuracy, it can't solve problems that require accuracy, which is almost all problems, right?
Anything else you guys want to say?
So two things. One, if you are interested in this type of research, or if you are a company that is trying to figure out how you can treat all lives equally and are open to us coming in and running some algorithm audits and holding your hand through some of the stuff, go to jointhetrap.com and come kick it with the squad. If you are a marketing department, public policy school that is looking for a super smart, independent researcher that is doing, I think, some of the most impressive work I've seen a doctoral student do, then you should hire Angela E., spelled Y-I, immediately. Reach out to her today before some other school scoops her up.
Thank you both very much. Appreciate your research, your work, you sharing your insights. It's an important topic. Thank you for indulging my kind of awkward stumbling and fumbling questions to get it to understand this issue better. Thank you for helping us all understand it better. Appreciate your work. And thanks again. Take care. And there you have it. A special thanks again to Dr. Broderick Turner and Angela E. for guiding me through this complicated subjects. And thank you to you, dear listeners. I know I always ask you to share the episode with someone who might find it useful, but for obvious reasons, this particular episode truly is one I think that more people should hear. So thank you for helping to spread the word. And if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to AI Curious at Apple, Spotify, and now YouTube. Thanks again, and see you next time.